Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. There is a room in Philadelphia where the future is being set in metal. Not written, not spoken, set, one letter at a time, backwards, inlaid. You are holding a word in your hand right now, a word that does not exist yet on any page. It exists only in your fingers, cold and small, and smelling of something close to blood. The year is 1776. The city is hot. The war is already happening. And tonight, a document arrives at the print shop on Chestnut Street. Handwritten, ink still faint in places, the margins crowded with crossings out, and someone has to touch every letter of it before it can reach the world. That someone is you. You will set the word self-evident in lead tonight. You will set the word creator. You will set the phrase, all men are created equal, letter by letter, backwards, in a composing stick no wider than your palm, and you will not know until the press runs whether the spacing is right. The men who wrote this document are sleeping tonight, or they think they are. You are not sleeping. You can hear the press breathing in the next room. You can hear Dunlap moving between the typecases, pulling letters, checking your work by candlelight, with 2 fingers pressed against the galley tray. You know what this document says. You have read it backwards, and then forwards, and then backwards again. You know it better than Jefferson knows it now. You have touched every word of it. You also know what happens to people who print documents like this if the British take this city. The harbor is 30 minutes from where you are standing. There are ships in that harbor. You do not look at the door. You pick up the composing stick. You find the next letter in the case, a lowercase h, worn at the serif from 10,000 previous jobs, and you set it in place. This is the job. This is tonight. In 30 years, people will talk about the men who signed this document. They will name streets after them. They will build monuments. They will not talk about the room where it was made, or the hands that made it, or the smell of linseed oil and tallow and hot lead at 2 in the morning on the 5th of July, 1776. But you were here. You made this. There is something else you will know by morning that you do not know yet. You will know that of the roughly 200 copies printed tonight, only 26 will survive the next 2.5 centuries. You will know that the document you are setting, the one with Jefferson's crossings out, still visible in the margins, the one Dunlap is squinting at under the lamp right now, will be read aloud in 4 days in the yard of the State House, to a crowd that does not yet know what to do with the sound of it. You will know the weight of a finished broadside still warm from the press. You will know the exact smell of this room at 3 in the morning. You will know that you set every word of it. And not one person outside these walls will know your name. This is Quiet History at Bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is Margaret Holt. You are 24 years old. You are a compositor, a typesetter, working in the print shop of John Dunlap on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is the summer of 1776, and the city smells like horse and river and something else underneath. Something like tension, like a room full of people trying not to speak. You are not supposed to be here. Not because of the hour, though it is nearly 8 in the evening and the heat of the day is only now beginning to release its grip on the cobblestones outside. You are not supposed to be here because women do not set type. That is the understanding. That is the tradition. The guild system in England has enforced it for a century. And while Philadelphia is not England, the habits of the trade crossed the Atlantic with the compositing sticks and the ink balls and the battered type cases that furnish every print shop on this continent. But your father was a printer. His name was Thomas Holt, and he came from County Cork. And he learned his trade in Dublin before the passage, and when he could not find a boy old enough and cheap enough to train as a proper apprentice, he taught you instead, because your hands were small and your eyes were sharp, and you did not complain when the lye in the ink-washing solution opened the cracks in your knuckles. He died 4 years ago, a fever in January. By then you already knew every case in his shop by touch. Dunlap hired you 6 months after your father's death, and he has never once acknowledged out loud that you are not the kind of worker his guild expects. You are simply here. You do what you are told. You do it faster and cleaner than the 2 male compositors he employs, neither of whom can set 800 Ms an hour without error, which you can. You do not talk about this. There are things in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776 that no one talks about directly. The weather is one of them. It has been brutally, historically hot. The delegates to the Continental Congress meeting a quarter mile from here in the Pennsylvania State House. The building everyone calls the State House, though its most famous room will one day be called Independence Hall, have been working in that heat for weeks in wool coats behind closed windows. The windows are closed because the debate inside is not for the street to hear. You know this the way everyone in this city knows it, not from newspapers, not from official communication, but from the particular quality of silence that has settled over Philadelphia like a second heat. Carriages you do not recognize, men you do not recognize. The boarding houses near the State House full of delegates from colonies you have never visited, Virginia, Georgia, the Carolinas, men who have spent the last weeks arguing about a document that Thomas Jefferson of Virginia has been drafting and revising since late June. You know Jefferson's name. Everyone in the printing trade knows Jefferson's name, the way they know John Adams's name, the way they know Benjamin Franklin's name, though Franklin is the only one of them who has ever actually stood at a compositor's case and picked up a piece of type with his own hands. Franklin was a printer's apprentice at 12 years old, in his brother's shop in Boston. He ran away from that apprenticeship eventually. He came to Philadelphia. He built a press of his own. That press is not so different from the one in the back room of this shop. You are thinking about none of this at 8 o'clock on the evening of July 4th. You are thinking about the piece of copy in front of you, a broadside for a merchant on 2nd Street, advertising the arrival of a shipment of Bohea tea, and you are thinking that the lowercase e in the second line of the second take has a damaged face and is printing slightly soft, and you need to swap it before the run. You walked to the shop this evening, as you do every evening, from the room you rent on Spruce Street, 3 blocks south. The walk takes 7 minutes when the streets are clear, longer when the market carts are still breaking down their stalls, which they were tonight. The market that runs along High Street was busy late. the heat of the day having kept buyers inside until the worst of it passed. You walked through the edge of the crowd, past the fish stalls and the produce sellers and the woman who sells gingerbread from a flat basket, past the smell of fish that has been sitting in the sun too long and the smell of fresh bread that has not, and onto Chestnut Street, where the walk is quieter and the buildings are taller, and the shadows between them hold the last of the day's heat like a closed fist. The city felt different this evening. You noticed it the way you always notice atmospheric shifts, not from any single thing, but from the accumulation of small signals. The groups of men standing on corners, not talking loudly the way men on corners usually talk, but quietly, heads inclined together. The number of horses tied outside the boarding houses near the State House, more than usual, and some of them still saddled, as if their riders intended to leave again before morning. A woman on Chestnut Street who stopped and asked you if you had heard, and then, before you could answer, seemed to think better of saying more and walked on. You did not know, walking to the shop tonight, exactly what had happened in the State House. You suspected. You pull the letter out of the composing stick with a speed that comes from 6 years of muscle memory. You hold it up to the window. The light is still enough to see by, barely. The damaged face confirms itself, a hairline crack along the lower serif, which will spread and worsen with every impression. You drop it in the hell box, the wooden tray where broken and worn type collects, until it can be melted back into new sorts at the foundry. You pull a replacement from the lower case, set it, and check the line with your fingertip. This is the physical reality of your work. The type is lead, an alloy of lead and tin and antimony, harder than pure lead but soft enough to be cast in the small steel molds called matrices that produce each individual letter. Each sort, each individual piece of type, is roughly an inch tall, the height standardized so that type from different foundries can be mixed in the same job if needed. The face of the letter, the printing surface, is no larger than the tip of your smallest finger. The body, the block of metal the face sits on, is wider than the face by a precise amount, that amount constituting what is called the set of the letter, the horizontal space it occupies in a line. You know all of this without thinking about it. You learned it before you learned to read. Your composing stick is set to a measure of 22 picas, roughly 3 2/3 inches, which is the column width of the broadside you are currently setting. You pick up the letters one at a time from the wooden type case in front of you, reading the copy pinned above the case, setting each letter in the stick upside down and mirror reversed, left to right, so that when the type is inked and pressed against paper it will print correctly. This reversal is so automatic to you now that you can read backwards faster than most people can read forwards. The type case itself is a shallow wooden tray divided into small compartments, each compartment holding the sorts for one letter or character. The arrangement is not alphabetical. The arrangement is by frequency of use. The most common letters in the nearest and most convenient positions, the rarest in the corners and edges you must reach for. E is nearest, always. Then T, A, O, I, N. The capitals are in the upper case, the small letters in the lower, which is why to this day people say uppercase and lowercase when they mean large and small letters. But you do not think about that either. You simply reach and pick and set. It is past 8 o'clock now. The daylight through the shop's front window has gone the color of old pewter. Dunlap has lit two of the oil lamps that hang from the ceiling beam above the main composing frame, and the room smells of lamp oil and the particular sweetness of fresh ink, a smell made from lamp black and linseed oil, boiled together and left to thicken, sometimes with a small amount of varnish added for body and tack. You are near the end of the Bohea Tea broadside when the door opens. You do not look up immediately. The door opens and closes a dozen times in a working day, but the quality of the footstep is different. Quick, deliberate, someone who has come from somewhere with a purpose and arrived slightly out of breath. You look up. A young man, not a regular customer. His coat is good wool, brass buttons, but his cravat is loose in the heat, and his face has the look of someone who has been walking fast through warm streets. He is carrying a sheaf of papers, folded and sealed, and he is looking past you at the back of the shop where Dunlap is making up a forme. Dunlap appears in the doorway that separates the front composing room from the press room. He is a large man, 31 years old, Irish-born like your father, with ink permanently worked into the creases of his knuckles. He takes one look at the young man, and something in his expression shifts. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of readiness, as if he has been waiting for this moment without knowing when it would arrive. The young man hands him the papers without speaking. Dunlap unties the string. He unfolds the outer sheet. He reads the first few lines. He does not look up for a long moment. When he does, he looks at you. "Clear the frame," he says. "Both takes, we have a night job." You do not ask what it is. You begin pulling the Bohea Tea type out of the frame, letter by letter, returning each sort to its correct compartment in the case. Your hands are steady. Your mind is very quiet. The young man leaves without another word. The door closes behind him. You work in silence, returning type. And across the room, Dunlap is reading the papers again, more slowly this time, standing under the lamp with his back to you. You are in no hurry. The type will come out as fast as it needs to. Your fingers know their way back to every compartment without looking. But the silence in the room has changed. You noticed it the moment Dunlap looked up from those papers. Something is moving through this evening like a current through still water. You cannot name it yet. You only know that whatever was on those pages caused a man who has printed for the Continental Congress before, who has printed currency, proclamations, military orders, to go still and careful in a way that the other jobs did not. You pull the last line of the broadside and drop the sorts back into the case. You lift the empty frame. You carry it to the stone table where the forme was set, and you place it ready for whatever comes next. The stone table is a slab of polished limestone, roughly 3 feet wide and 5 feet long, set on a heavy wooden base in the center of the compositing room. It has been here since Dunlap set up the shop. The surface is ground flat to within 1/1000th of an inch, flat enough to serve as the final check for whether a locked forme is sitting evenly, flat enough that a hair-thin variation in the height of a single type sort registers as a wobble against the stone. You have run your palm across it 1,000 times. It is cool and very slightly damp in the summer heat, condensation from the air collecting on the polished surface overnight. You set the empty chase on the stone. You wipe your hands on your apron. Your apron is made of a heavy cotton canvas that was once a pale tan color. It is now the color of a printer's apron, which is to say it has no single color but contains all the colors of the trade. Black from the lamp-black ink, brown from the linseed oil, silver gray from the lead, and a faint ochre from whatever the ink picks up off old paper. The apron ties at the back and reaches from your chest to your knees, and it is the most functional garment you own because it has deep pockets on either side. One for the bodkin, the small pointed tool you use to adjust individual sorts in the galley when the spacing needs correction. One for a folded paper proof that you may need to reference. One, tonight, for a piece of chalk you use to mark a damaged sort before pulling it. The bodkin's handle is worn smooth where your thumb rests. Your father made it from a piece of fruit wood. The handle turned on a small lathe he kept in the back of his shop. You carry it every working day. Dunlap comes to the composing frame. He sets the papers on the copyboard, the small wooden stand that holds the manuscript at eye level for the compositor to read from. He adjusts the lamp. He does not say anything for a moment. Then he says, "Can you work until morning?" You say yes. He turns back to the copyboard without further explanation, and you understand that the explanation is not coming, and you understand also, from the weight of his silence, from the particular careful way his hand pressed flat against those papers while he read, that you are about to set something that has not been set before. You pick up your composing stick. You look at the copyboard, and the first line you see, in Jefferson's handwriting, crossings out and interlineations and all, reads, "A declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled." You hold very still for just a moment. Then you find the capital A in the uppercase. You place it in the stick. You find the space. You place it. You find the lowercase d. The night has begun. Philadelphia in the summer of 1776 is a city of approximately 30,000 people, making it the largest city in the colonies and the second largest in the British Empire after London. It sits between two rivers, the Delaware to the east, navigable and commercial, crowded with docks and warehouses and the masts of ships, the Schuylkill to the west, quieter, less trafficked. The streets between them are laid in a grid, wide and regular, which is unusual for a city of this age and was the deliberate design of William Penn a century earlier. The city has been the center of colonial political life for more than a year. The First Continental Congress met here in 1774. The Second Continental Congress has been meeting here continuously since May of 1775, interrupted only briefly when the threat of British military action drove the delegates briefly to Baltimore in the winter. They returned. They always return. Philadelphia is the logical center of the colonial cause, in part because of its geography, and in part because of its printing trade. There are more print shops per capita in Philadelphia than in any other city in the colonies. Benjamin Franklin's old printing house, the shop of William Bradford, the shop of Robert Bell, who printed Thomas Paine's Common Sense, that 46-page pamphlet published in January of this year, which has sold more than 100,000 copies in the month since, and has done more to turn ordinary colonists toward independence than any speech given in any hall. You have read Common Sense. You read it because Dunlap printed a later edition, and you set portions of it yourself. You read Paine's argument the same way you read everything set in this shop, backwards first in the composing stick, then forward in the proof. You found that reading it backwards did not diminish it. The sentences were strong enough to survive. The war has been happening for 14 months. The shooting started at Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, a series of small engagements in Massachusetts that escalated into a siege of Boston that lasted almost a year, ending with the British evacuation of that city in March of 1776. Since then, the focus of military activity has shifted. General Washington, commanding the Continental Army, is in New York. He has roughly 19,000 men. The British are coming. Everyone knows this. A force of 30,000 soldiers and sailors is assembling off the coast, the largest expeditionary force Britain has ever deployed, and it is pointed at New York Harbor. Philadelphia is watching New York the way a person watches a fire in the next street, close enough to feel the heat, not yet sure which way the wind will carry it. What happened today in the State House a quarter mile from where you now stand, picking up a capital D for declaration, is this. The Continental Congress formally adopted a document declaring the 13 colonies to be independent states, no longer under the sovereignty of the British Crown. The document was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, 33 years old, of Virginia. It was debated and revised, some 86 changes by some counts, and today, by vote, it was adopted. Now it must be printed. That is why you are here, with your composing stick, at 8:30 in the evening, reading a handwritten manuscript in the candlelight. The document needs to be in the hands of every colonial assembly, every general, every printer in every city by the middle of next week. It cannot travel as a handwritten manuscript. There is only one of those, and it stays here. It must be printed. It must be printed tonight, as many copies as the press can run before morning, so that riders can carry it out of the city with the dawn. That is the night job. You set the D. You set the E. Your composing stick is cool against your palm. The lead sorts are even cooler, the way metal is always cooler than the air around it, and heavier than they look, and slightly soft to the touch, the antimony in the alloy not quite enough to make them hard. You are setting history in your hands, and your hands are the steadiest thing in this room. The composing stick is set to a measure of 22 picas. You have checked it 3 times already. Dunlap specified the measure when he set up the job, and you have set it on your stick using the small adjustable slide at one end that locks the line width in place. It is a wider column than most of the work that comes through this shop. The declaration is a broadside, a single large sheet printed on one side only, meant to be posted or read aloud or distributed flat. It is not a pamphlet. It is not a newspaper. It is something else, something for which there is not an exact precedent in your experience. And Dunlap has been quiet about the design in the way that printers are quiet when they are solving a problem they have not yet solved. You are working from Jefferson's manuscript, which sits in the copyboard in front of you, and you are only 3 sentences in. The first sentence is long, enormously long. It is 1 sentence from when to the period after mankind, and within that single sentence there are 3 subordinate clauses, a participial phrase, and a construction that requires you to hold the grammar in your head while your hands are doing something entirely different. You have set long sentences before, legal documents, legislative proclamations, but this sentence has a particular quality that you noticed when you first read it, and that you notice again now as you set it letter by letter. It moves. There is a rhythm to it, a kind of forward pressure that pushes through the subordinate clauses and lands on the word mankind with the full weight of everything that came before. You have read it 4 times now. Each time, from a different position in the sentence, you see something new. You are not a philosopher. You set type. But you know what a well-made sentence feels like. And this is a well-made sentence. The letter you are holding right now is a lowercase s. In 18th century printing, the lowercase s exists in 2 forms. At the end of a word, or at the end of a syllable, you use the short s, the one that looks like the letter you know. But at the beginning of a word, or in the middle, you use the long s, written as s, which looks, to an untrained eye, very much like a lowercase f. This is the convention. It has been the convention in English printing for over 200 years. You do not think about it. Your hand already knows, from the position of the letter in the word, which form to reach for. The word is self-evident. You need the long cease. You find it in the case. It has its own compartment, slightly to the left of the short s, and you place it in the stick. Then E, then L, then F, then the hyphen, then the capital E for evident, because in the manuscript Jefferson has capitalized it, in the way that abstractions and important nouns are often capitalized in this century: truth, creator, happiness. You have already set creator with a capital C. You have already set nature and nature's God. You will set happiness before this night is done. The convention of capitalizing nouns, particularly nouns that carry philosophical or political weight, is not accidental. It is a visual signal to the reader, a way of saying that this word is doing more than its ordinary work. The capital letter lifts the word slightly out of the sentence and makes it visible as a concept. You reach for the capital E in the uppercase. Your composing stick holds, at this measure, approximately 45 sorts per line. When the line is full, you feel it. The stick is tight, the letters pressing against each other with no play in them, and you slide the full line onto the galley tray and begin the next. Between each line, you add a thin strip of lead called a lead, no thicker than a playing card, which creates the small space between lines that makes the text readable. Too little leading and the lines blur into each other. Too much and the text loses coherence. You are using 2 points of leading on this job. Dunlap specified it. The galley tray is a long, shallow wooden tray with a raised edge on 3 sides, open at one end, that holds the type as you build the column. It sits on the composing stone, a flat surface of polished limestone, level and smooth, against which you can check that your type is sitting flat. If a sort has a broken foot, if the base of the metal body is damaged, it will tip slightly in the galley and print unevenly. You run your fingers across the face of the set type periodically, feeling for any sort that sits too high or too low. You have found 3 damaged sorts in the first column and a half. You have pulled each one, dropped it in the hell box, replaced it from the case. Dunlap is working at the second compositing frame, to your left. He is setting the preamble, the block of text that comes before the long list of grievances against the king, and he is working in silence, reading from the manuscript with the particular focused calm of an experienced compositor who has set enough difficult copy that difficulty itself has become ordinary. But this is not ordinary, and you both know it. There is a moment, Around 9 o'clock, when you stop to rest your hand, the composing stick is held in the left hand, and the act of holding it open and steady for hours builds a particular ache in the web of muscle between thumb and forefinger, and you look at the galley tray and read what you have set. Reading backwards is as natural as reading forward for you. Your eye moves across the face of the type and parses the reversed letters, and the words form themselves in your mind without effort. What you read in the first full column of the galley is this: when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. You hold your hand flat for a moment, resting the weight of the composing stick on the edge of the frame. The word separation. You set that word 20 minutes ago. You placed the long S, the E, the P, the A, the R, the A, the T, the I, the O, the N, 10 letters. You were not thinking about what they meant when you set them. You were thinking about the spacing of the preceding word, which was running slightly wide and needed a thin space removed to bring the line into proper justification. Now you are thinking about what they mean. The separation, not a disagreement, not a complaint. A separation, the way a bone separates from a joint, the way a ship separates from its mooring, something that, once completed, cannot easily be undone. You pick up the composing stick again. The ache in your hand is still there. You ignore it. Dunlap glances at your galley tray from across the room. How far? He asks. First column, nearly through the preamble. He nods. He looks at his own tray. He does not say anything about what you are setting, about what this document is or what it means. He is your employer. He is a printer. He is doing a job that was given to him by the Congress of the United States of America, a body which did not exist 18 months ago and which now, tonight, has asked him to make its founding document real. This is the nature of the printing trade. The ideas come from elsewhere. The printers make them physical. They make them transferable, reproducible, sendable across distances. A thought in Jefferson's head is a thought in Jefferson's head. A thought in Jefferson's head, set in type and impressed into paper 200 times, is a public fact. It is the difference between a conversation and a country. You find the lowercase w for the first word of the next paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You set the W, capital, because it opens the sentence. You set the E, the space, the H of hold. You are moving faster now. The copy has a rhythm and your hands are finding it. The type case in front of you is a California job case, an American design, larger than the English cases your father used, combining what would have been two separate cases into one. It is roughly 32 inches wide and 17 inches deep, divided into 89 compartments of varying sizes. The largest compartments hold the most common letters, E, at more than 3 times the space of Q or Z. You do not look at the case while you work. You look at the copy, and your hand moves to the correct compartment, the way a musician's hand moves to the correct string. Your father taught you this with blindfolds, literally with a strip of cloth over your eyes. 3 sessions, each one an hour. picking letters by touch only, your fingers learning the geography of the case from the inside. By the end of the third session, you could name any letter placed in your hand by its shape and weight alone. Capital letters slightly taller and therefore heavier than their lowercase equivalents. Common letters worn smooth and soft at the face from repeated use. Rare letters still sharp-edged, almost mint condition. He was not a sentimental man. He did not tell you that you were learning faster than any apprentice he had seen. He told you to do it again. You set the H of hold, you set the O, you set the L, the D, the space. We hold these truths. You know what comes next. You have read the manuscript twice. You know what you are building toward, and you are building toward it one letter at a time. In the particular silence of a print shop at night, with the lamp guttering slightly in a draft from somewhere, and the smell of ink thickening in the summer heat. It is necessary here to understand what this shop is. The Dunlap print shop occupies the ground floor of a building on Chestnut Street, a few blocks west of the State House. The shop has two rooms. The front compositing room, where you are now, and the press room behind it, separated by a heavy curtain that does not do much to muffle the sound of the press when it is running. The shop is perhaps 30 feet deep and 20 feet wide, which is a substantial space for a print shop of this era and reflects Dunlap's position as one of the more prosperous printers in the city. He prints the Pennsylvania Packet, a newspaper. He prints government work. He prints commercial broadsides and legal notices and almanacs. The press room behind the curtain holds the press itself, a large wooden screw press of the type that has not changed substantially since Gutenberg built his first press in the 1450s. The press is built around a heavy wooden screw attached at its lower end to a flat plate called the platen. The formy, the assembled and locked type sitting in its iron chase, is placed on the bed of the press. The paper is positioned above it, held in a frame called the tympan. When the pressman pulls the bar, it drives the platen down onto the paper and the type with enough force to transfer the ink cleanly. One pull of the bar produces one impression. 200 copies of this document will take somewhere between 50 and 60 minutes of press time, assuming no breakdowns, no damaged type, no paper misfeeds. But first, all the type must be set. You are perhaps a quarter of the way through it. You pick up the next letter. It is a capital C for creator, and you have found your rhythm again, your hand moving from case to stick to case to stick in the particular repetitive motion that, after enough hours, ceases to feel like motion at all and becomes something more like breathing. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You set happiness, the long S before the final S, and slide the full line onto the galley. You take a breath. The line is straight and tight, and the spacing is even, and it says what it says, and you are not sure exactly what you feel about that, so you do not try to name it. You reach for the next letter. The political situation in the colonies in the summer of 1776 is one in which no one entirely agrees about anything except that something has to be decided. The Congress has been debating the question of independence for months, and the debate has not been simple. There are delegates who believe the separation from Britain is the only possible course. There are delegates who believe it is premature or dangerous or both. There are delegates who believe it is treason and will say so privately even if they will not say it publicly. The document you are setting was not adopted unanimously in the sense that every delegate voted for it. New York's delegation abstained, lacking instructions from home. Several delegates who might have opposed it were simply absent on the day of the vote. The unanimity declared in the document's final language, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, is a political assertion as much as a literal fact, a way of presenting the colonies to the world as a single coherent voice rather than a collection of bickering provincial governments. You know none of this specifically, but you know the general shape of it because you live here, in this city, and you hear things, and you have been setting type for the Congress's various proclamations and resolutions for 6 months. You know that unanimous is a word that gets used in official documents to mean something slightly different from what it means in ordinary conversation. You set the word anyway. You set it correctly. The lowercase oo, the N, the A, the N, again I, M, O, U, S. 9 letters. They take approximately 4 seconds to set. The world they describe, or claim to describe, took considerably longer to construct. It is past 10 o'clock now. Your candle has burned down by a third, and Dunlap has replaced the oil in one of the hanging lamps. The shop has settled into the nighttime rhythm that you know from late newspaper deadlines and rush legal jobs. A quiet that is not peace but concentration, the particular focused stillness of people doing exacting work in the dark. Your back aches. This is normal. The compositor's stance, standing at the case, weight forward on the balls of the feet, left arm extended to hold the composing stick, right hand moving between case and stick in a continuous picking motion, builds a specific kind of fatigue in the lower back and in the left shoulder, where the weight of the filling stick pulls the arm gradually downward over the course of hours. You shift your weight from foot to foot. You do not stop working. In the press room, you can hear Dunlap's assistant, a young man named Samuel, 16 years old, press apprentice, here every working day, beginning to make the press ready. Dunlap must have sent word earlier in the evening, before the job was confirmed, the way experienced printers anticipate. The sound of the ink balls being worked against the ink table. The scrape of the tympan frame being checked for alignment. The press creaking as Samuel runs his hand over the platen to check for debris. The smell of fresh ink intensifies. Ink for a night run is slightly warmer than ink from a cold press in the morning. The linseed oil component is sensitive to temperature, and the shop has held the day's heat. The ink will roll a little easier tonight because of it, and the impressions will be slightly richer. You know these things without having been taught them explicitly. You absorbed them over years, standing next to your father while he talked about whatever he was doing, not instructing exactly, just narrating his own work in the way that certain kinds of knowledge can only be passed. You wonder, briefly, what your father would think of this night. Then you set the wondering aside because there is no useful answer to it, and there is a full galley still to be composed. The grievances section of the document, the long list of charges against King George III, begins on the 3rd column of the broadside. You will reach it in perhaps an hour. It is the longest section. It is also the section that will be in some ways the hardest to set, not because the language is difficult, but because it is repetitive. A series of accusations beginning with "he has" or "he is," and repetition in composition is its own kind of trap. The eye begins to slide, the hand begins to anticipate. You set a word that is not there, or you skip a word that is, because your hands have begun to run slightly ahead of your reading. You will be careful. You are always careful. Your composing stick holds 38 sorts right now, which is not quite a full line. You are in the middle of a sentence about the establishment of judges dependent on the Crown's will alone. It is one of the medium-length grievances, not one of the short accusatory bursts, and not one of the expansive clauses that require you to hold an entire complex thought in your head while your hand is doing something else. You pull the lowercase w for will. Then you stop. Something has happened to the silence. Not a sound from outside, not a carriage, not a shout, not the particular heavy footfall of the night watch making its rounds on the cobblestones. Something inside the room, a shift in quality, in weight. You look up. Dunlap is standing at his compositing frame, but he has stopped working. His composing stick is still in his left hand, a half-full line of type already set in it. But his right hand is not moving. He is looking at the front window of the shop. The front window faces Chestnut Street. At this hour, Chestnut Street is quiet, not empty. This city is never fully empty, but quiet enough that any irregular sound would carry. The window glass is old, slightly wavy, and it gives the lamplight from the street a faintly rippled quality. There is a shadow moving along the outside of the glass. It resolves, a figure walking, not stopping, moving past. The night watch. You both wait. The footsteps continue. They do not slow. They do not stop. They move on down Chestnut Street at the even measured pace of a man who has a route and is following it. You and Dunlap do not look at each other. You pick up the lowercase w again. You set it in the stick. Will, then alone. Then a space. Then the next accusation. He has made judges dependent on his will alone. You know in the way that you know everything that lives under the surface of this night without being spoken aloud, exactly what it would mean if the British took this city and found this shop, if they found the Forme locked in its chase on the press bed, the type still inked, the Declaration of Independence not yet washed off the face of the metal. The penalty for printing seditious material and a document declaring independence from the Crown is by any definition the British Crown would use seditious material is not a fine, it is not imprisonment, or not only imprisonment, it is at its furthest extent execution. Hanging for a printer or a writer or an editor who has printed the wrong thing at the wrong time for the wrong government. You are aware of this. You have been aware of it since you read the first line of the manuscript and understood what it was. You set the next line. Your hand is steady. You check the spacing with your fingertip. The lead sorts are cool and precise in your palm, each one a physical argument for a specific shape of sound, and you are making something tonight that does not yet exist, and that once it exists cannot be unmade. 56 men will sign this document. Most of them have not signed it yet. The formal engrossed copy will not be completed until August, and the signatures will come in over weeks. But the document was adopted today, and tonight it is being printed, and in the morning it will begin its movement outward through the colonies, by horse, by boat, by other printers who will set it again in their own shops, in their own cities, each typesetter making their own small set of decisions about spacing and leading and the measure of the column. each one touching the words with their hands, each one reading them backwards first. You slide another full line onto the galley. The galley is getting heavy. A full galley of lead type is not a light thing. The assembled sorts for a full column of text can weigh several pounds, and the galley tray itself adds to that. When you carry a finished galley to the stone for Dunlap to check, you carry it flat, both hands underneath, the way you would carry a tray of water. A dropped galley is a disaster. The type falls out of order and must be entirely reset. Pi is what printers call a dropped or scrambled form, the sorted characters now a chaotic mixture. You have never pied a galley, not once in 6 years. You do not intend to start tonight. Your father would have had something to say about this night. He would have said something brief and sideways about it, the way Irish men of his generation said important things, from an angle with the serious point wrapped in something that looked almost like humor. He would have noticed the manuscript on the copyboard. He would have read it. He would not have said directly that it was extraordinary. He would have said something like, "Well, that's a long first sentence." And then he would have said it. You pick up the H for the next accusation. Capital, he has. You set it. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. You set the period. You slide the line, begin the next. It is somewhere past 11 o'clock. The composing frame, the lamp, the smell of the ink, the slight creak of the press being adjusted in the back room, all of it has narrowed to this: the copyboard, the case, the stick, the galley. One line at a time, the document accumulates. Outside, Chestnut Street is quiet. Inside, Philadelphia is being told what it is. You are the one telling it. Your hand moves to the case. You find the lowercase e. You place it in the stick. You find the next letter. You keep going. The grievances section is the longest part of the document. You knew this from the first read-through, when Dunlap set the manuscript on the copyboard and you scanned the full text before beginning. The preamble, the opening paragraphs, the statement of principles, the declaration itself, runs perhaps a quarter of the document. The remaining 3/4 is the list. The accusations, each one beginning with "he has" or "he is" or "for," each one a specific charge laid against King George III, numbered in the manner of an indictment even though they are not numbered on the page. The repetition of construction serving the same purpose as numbering, to make the charges feel categorical, comprehensive, impossible to dismiss as complaint. You are setting the 14th charge now, or thereabouts. You have lost count. They accumulate the way small debts accumulate, individually manageable, collectively suffocating. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. You set harass, then our, then people. The comma after people requires a comma sort, a small piece of type that is nothing but a comma. No letter attached, just the punctuation alone. You reach for it without looking. It is in the lower left quadrant of the case where all the punctuation lives. Your fingers know the difference between a comma and a period by the slight additional length of the comma's tail against the pad of your fingertip. You place it, then and, then eat. The language of this document is not the language of legal proclamations, which tend toward the passive voice and the conditional. This is active, concrete. Swarms of officers eat out their substance. The verb eat, applied to government officers, is deliberate. It is accusatory in a way that carries physical disgust inside it. The image of consumption, of something being devoured that cannot be replaced. Jefferson chose this word carefully. He chose all the words carefully, though you can see from the crossings out in the manuscript that some of the careful choosing happened in revision rather than in the first draft. There are places in the manuscript where whole lines have been struck through with a single horizontal stroke. There are places where words have been written above the line, additions squeezed between the existing text, the handwriting slightly smaller and more cramped in the interlineations. The manuscript has the physical evidence of argument visible in it, not just Jefferson's argument with himself, but the Congress's argument with Jefferson, the changes that came from the floor of the debate, the phrases that were considered and rejected and sometimes reconsidered. You are setting the result of all that argument, the final version, the thing that survived. The charge you are setting now took perhaps an hour to debate. You do not know this for certain, but you know how these things work. You have set enough legislative proceedings and committee reports to understand that no piece of language in a political document is accidental. Every word represents a choice that someone made in the face of someone else's objection. You set substance. You slide the line onto the galley. You begin the next charge. He has kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. The long S in legislatures, your hand finds it without thought. The clock on the wall of the shop, a simple wooden shelf clock, spring-wound, that Dunlap winds every morning, reads 20 minutes past 11. You have been working for nearly 3 hours on this document. Your back aches in the familiar place, the muscle just to the right of the lumbar spine that takes the most of the compositor's forward lean. Your feet ache inside your shoes, the leather soles thin enough that you can feel the irregularities of the floorboard grain through them after enough hours of standing. You notice these things the way you notice the ache in your composing hand. You register them and continue. This is the work. The ink smell in the room has thickened over the course of the evening. Ink smell is layered. The top note is the lamp black, carbon, almost no smell of its own but carrying the faint sharpness of combustion, of something recently burned. Underneath that is the linseed oil, warmer, almost edible, with the faint sweetness of oil that has been heated and worked and aged. And underneath that, fainter, the smell of the lead sorts themselves. Lead has a smell. People say it does not, but you have worked with it long enough to know that it does. Something between metal and something you cannot name, something the tongue recognizes before the brain catches up. Your hands smell of lead by the end of every working day. No amount of washing fully removes it. The skin of your fingertips has absorbed it over years, and there is something underneath the surface now that was not there when you began, some faint gray quality to the whorls of your fingerprints that your father had too, that every printer has, that marks you the way a trade marks everyone who practices it long enough. You pick up the capital H for the next charge. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws. Long as in subject, long as in jurisdiction, long as in constitution. 3 in one sentence. Your hand moves to the left quadrant of the case 3 times in rapid succession, each time retrieving the same sort, each time placing it in a slightly different position within the line. To anyone watching, this looks like a single continuous motion. Hand to case, case to stick, hand to case, case to stick, without pause, without hesitation. In practice, it is 3 separate decisions happening faster than decision seems to take. You have heard people describe compositors' work as mechanical. You understand why they say it. The motion, observed from outside, looks like a machine operation, repetitive, rhythmic, without visible thought. What they do not see is the constant reading, the constant anticipation, the perpetual low-level parsing of the next syllable, the next word, the end of the next line, the spacing decisions that are made and adjusted and readjusted in the 10th of a second between picking up one sort and placing it. Compositing is not mechanical. It is a performance of a very specific kind of intelligence, practiced until the intelligence becomes invisible inside the motion. Your father used to say that a good compositor is a reader who happens to be working backwards. You set the period at the end of the sentence. You slide the line. Dunlap appears at the curtain between the compositing room and the press room. He is holding a proof sheet, a single piece of paper, damp, slightly smeared at one edge where the press has deposited a little more ink than intended. He holds it up to the lamp, squinting at the lines. The second galley, he says, column break is wrong. The indent after independent needs to come up 2 lines. You look at the galley tray to your left, where the second galley, the one Dunlap set earlier in the evening, sits waiting. The column break is a matter of where one column of text ends and the next begins on the broadside. Broadside design is a compression problem. You are fitting a very long document onto a single large sheet, which means the column breaks must be managed carefully so that no line is orphaned at the top of a column, no sentence is broken at an awkward place. You move to the second galley. You find the line in question. You make the adjustment, pulling the line that needs to move, resetting the space, checking with your fingertip. It takes 4 minutes. Better, Dunlap says, looking at the adjusted galley. He goes back through the curtain. You return to your frame. You pick up the capital F for the next charge. This one begins with 4. The accusations that start this way are slightly different in rhythm from the he has charges, slightly more legalistic in construction. The complaint embedded in a subordinate clause rather than stated as direct action. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. 6 words, 1 prepositional phrase, 1 participial phrase. You set them without stopping. The charge refers to the Quartering Acts, British parliamentary legislation that required colonial households and businesses to provide lodging and supplies to British soldiers stationed in the colonies. The first act passed in 1765, requiring colonies to provide barracks, food, and other necessities. The second act, passed in 1774, extended this requirement to private homes. In Boston, in the years before the fighting started, this meant British soldiers in your parlor, eating your food, sleeping in your spare room, with no mechanism by which you could refuse. You know this from the newspapers. You know it from the accounts that came through Philadelphia during the Boston crisis, accounts that Dunlap and other printers published, that you set into type, that circulated through the city and hardened something that had previously been only soft discontent into something with edges. You set troops. You set among. You set us. The period. The familiar slide of the line onto the galley. It is past midnight now. You know this not from the clock, which you cannot see from your current position at the frame, but from the quality of the silence outside. Philadelphia after midnight has a particular sound, or rather, a particular absence of sound, punctuated at long intervals by footsteps, by the distant sound of a horse somewhere on a cobbled street, by nothing. The city has quieted to its minimum, the point at which only the necessary and the wakeful are still moving. You are wakeful. You are necessary. Samuel comes through the curtain from the press room with a question about the paper. The ream they have been using is nearly finished, and the second ream, stored in the dry corner of the press room, has a slight difference in texture that may affect how the ink takes. He is holding 2 sheets side by side, one from each ream. You take the sheets. You hold them both to the lamp. The paper used for printing in 1776 is made from linen and cotton rags, not wood pulp, which will not become the standard paper-making material until the 19th century. The process of making rag paper begins with collecting worn linen shirts, cotton scraps, old rope, any textile that can be broken down. The rags are soaked, beaten into a pulp in large vats, and then lifted out of the vat on a wire mesh mold, a rectangular frame strung with thin wires spaced a fraction of an inch apart. The pulp drains through the mesh, leaving a thin mat of interlocked fibers that, once pressed and dried, becomes paper. The slight pattern of the wire mesh remains visible in the finished sheet if you hold it to the light. Those are called the laid lines, the thin parallel impressions running across the sheet, and between them at wider intervals the chain lines, slightly heavier marks where the frame's structural wires ran. Every ream of paper carries these marks, like a watermark embedded in the texture itself. The sheet Samuel holds from the second ream is slightly smoother than the first. You can feel it by running your thumb across the surface, the grain less pronounced, the felt marks from the paper-making mold slightly shallower. This means the mold was newer, or the rags were finer, or both. Better rags, finer linen, less cotton, produce a smoother, more even sheet. Smoother paper can be a problem with certain inks. The ink needs something to grip. Too smooth, and the ink sits on the surface rather than being absorbed into the fibers, and the impression smears on the pull, or picks, the paper sticking to the typeface and lifting slightly as the platen rises, depositing small threads of fiber on the type. A pict for me must be cleaned before the next impression, which costs time on a long run. Linen rag paper is generally consistent enough that this kind of variation is minor, but on a long run, minor variations compound. Use it, you tell him. The ink is warm enough tonight. It will take. Samuel is 16 and has the careful solemnity of someone who understands, without having been told explicitly, that the job being done in this shop tonight is not an ordinary job. He nods and goes back through the curtain. You hear him carrying the ream across the press room, the slight scuff of his shoes on the press room floor, and then the sound of the ream being set down carefully on the paper table beside the press. You return to the copyboard. You have covered, by your rough count, approximately 2/3 of the grievances section. There are perhaps 12 to 15 charges remaining. Beyond the charges, there is the closing paragraph, the actual declaration, the statement of independence itself, the formal assertion that these United States are and ought to be free. That is the final section. You have read it. You know what it says. You are not there yet. You pick up the next capital H. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. Long S in against. Your hand goes left without your mind directing it. This charge is about a specific moment. In August of 1775, King George III issued a proclamation declaring the colonies to be in a state of rebellion and calling on loyal subjects to report any treasonous activity. The proclamation did not offer protection. It offered prosecution. It was, in the language of the day, an abdication. The king declaring that his subjects in America had placed themselves outside the king's law and that he would treat them accordingly. You set war. Capital W, the way Jefferson wrote it. War as a concept. War as a noun that carries its own gravity. You have set the word war in type many times. In newspaper reports, in legislative proceedings, in pamphlets and proclamations. It is an ordinary word in the printing trade of 1776, worn smooth from use like an E-sort that has been picked 10,000 times. But tonight it sits in your composing stick differently. Tonight there are 19,000 Continental soldiers in New York, a city you have never seen, sleeping in whatever shelter they have found, knowing that 30,000 British soldiers are coming. Tonight the word war is not a report about something happening somewhere else. It is the shape of the world you are currently living inside. You set the period. You slide the line. Dunlap comes back through the curtain, drying his hands on his apron. He looks at your galley. He looks at the manuscript on the copyboard, calculating how much remains. How is the hand, he asks. The hand, he means the composing hand, the left one, the one that holds the stick. It has been aching since 10 o'clock. The muscle between thumb and forefinger has gone from acute ache to a duller, flatter soreness, which is actually better. Duller pain is easier to work through than sharp pain. Fine, you say. He nods. This is the full extent of the conversation. He goes back to his galley, picks up his own composing stick, continues. You continue. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. 4 verbs in sequence: plundered, ravaged, burnt, destroyed, each one a single strong stress on the first syllable, a kind of drumbeat, the sentence building through accumulation, the way the whole list of charges has been building, each accusation added to the previous ones until the weight of them becomes something structural, something load-bearing. Jefferson knew how to build a sentence the way a mason knows how to build a wall, not just for the meaning of the individual stones, but for the stress they place on each other, the way they distribute weight, the way the whole holds together under pressure. You are, right now, the mason. You place the comma after coasts. You place the comma after towns. You carry the D of destroyed and set it and continue to the and lives and of and our and people. You set the period. You set the line. Your galley is nearly full. When a galley is full, when it holds as much set type as it can hold at the correct measure and leading, it is carried to the stone where the column is checked for evenness, tied with a cord to hold the type in position, and transferred into the iron chase for locking. The chase is a rectangular metal frame, exactly the size of the printing area of the broadside. The locked for me, the chase with the type secured inside it by wooden wedges called quoins, is what goes onto the press bed. Dunlap will check your galley before it goes to the stone. He will run his fingertip across the face of the type, feeling for uneven sorts. He will check the spacing between words with a thin metal gauge, looking for lines that are too loose or too tight. He has done this with every galley tonight. He does not say anything when your work passes the check. The absence of comment is the acknowledgement. This is how Dunlap has always communicated approval. Not with words, but with the removal of words. When something is wrong, he says so directly, without softening, in the manner of a man who considers clarity more respectful than cushioning. When something is right, he says nothing, and you have learned to read that silence as precisely as you read the copyboard. 6 months into this job, you learned to tell the difference between the silence that means acceptable and the silence that means good. The silence that means good has a slightly different quality to it. It lasts a half-second longer, and Dunlap's hand comes away from the galley more slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Tonight, every galley you have brought to the stone has received the longer silence. You reach for the next capital H. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. This is one of the longer charges. It is also, you think, reading it from the copyboard, one of the angrier ones. The controlled anger of the preamble gone here, replaced by something more forward, the language reaching for the most categorical condemnation Jefferson can find, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages. The charge is about the hiring of Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries from the state of Hesse-Kassel, contracted by the British government to supplement the regular British Army. 29,000 Hessians have been contracted for the North American campaign. They are already aboard ships. They are coming. You set mercenaries, capital M. You set desolation, long cess. You set tyranny. You set barbarous, then ages, then the comma, then and. The line is full. You slide it onto the galley and begin the next without pausing. It is midnight. The lamp above the compositing frame is burning lower than it was an hour ago, the oil depleting. The light slightly warmer and slightly more orange than before. You have been working by lamplight for 4 hours. Your eyes have adjusted to the quality of it, the slight flatness of shadows, the way the flame moves in the drafts that come through the gap under the front door, causing the shadows across your galley tray to shift and resettle. You add oil to the lamp without stopping work. This requires a particular motion, setting the composing stick on the frame ledge, opening the oil reservoir of the lamp with your right hand, tilting the small ceramic oil jug you keep on the shelf above the frame, watching the level rise in the reservoir, closing it again. 40 seconds. Then the stick is back in your hand. You have done this enough times that your eyes never fully leave the copyboard. You are near the end of the list. You can feel it the way you can feel the end of a long typesetting job, not from counting exactly, but from the accumulating weight of what you have already set and the diminishing amount remaining on the copyboard, and a kind of forward pressure in the copy itself, the charges building towards something, the document reaching for its conclusion the way a very long sentence reaches for its period. The final charges are coming, and after them, the closing paragraph. After the closing paragraph, there will be a pause, and then the press will run. You pick up the capital H. You set it. You keep going into the dark. The last charge sits on the copyboard. You have been working through the list for the better part of 2 hours, and the list is nearly done. There are 2 more he has charges, and then a short transitional paragraph, Jefferson's acknowledgement that the colonists have petitioned, have appealed, have tried every civil remedy available before arriving at this point, and then the closing paragraph. The declaration itself. You set the second to last charge carefully. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. You set it because it is in the document, and you are setting the document, but you hold savages, capital S, in your composing hand for a moment longer than the other words. The sort is the same weight as any other capital. The lead does not distinguish between a word that is a title and a word that is an accusation, but you read it backwards in the galley after you slide the line. And what you read is a word that Jefferson chose and the Congress left. And what you understand about the word is that it is doing something different from the other language in this document. It is not describing a condition or a policy, but a category of people. And the category is absolute. You do not linger on this. There is more to set. You pick up the next letter. The final charge reads, "He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands." You set it, all of it. Long S in constrained, long S in themselves. The period at the end. You slide the final line of the grievances section onto the galley. You straighten up. Your back makes a sound that you do not acknowledge. You roll your left shoulder once, feeling the capsule of the joint resist and then release. You look at the galley, nearly full, perhaps 4 lines remaining before it is at capacity. And then you look at the copyboard where the transitional paragraph waits. Dunlap is watching you from his frame. He has been watching you for the last 20 minutes, you think, in the peripheral way that experienced workers watch each other, not staring, not monitoring, just keeping you in a corner of his awareness the way the press room sounds are always in a corner of his awareness. "Last galley," he says. "Last galley," you confirm. He does not say anything else. He comes to stand beside you at the copyboard, and for a moment you are both reading the closing section of the document, the 2 of you, side by side, the lamplight falling across Jefferson's handwriting from above and to the left. The closing begins with the transitional paragraph. "Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. You pick up the composing stick. You find the capital N. The transitional paragraph is important in the structure of the document, and you understood this when you first read it, and you understand it again now, setting it. The declaration is not simply a list of grievances against the king. It is an argument, and arguments require the consideration and rejection of alternatives. Jefferson is showing that the colonists tried other things first, appealed to the British people, to Parliament, to the sense of shared history and culture and interest that existed between England and the colonies, and were refused. The argument is, we did not choose this. This was chosen for us. You set unwarrantable. You set jurisdiction. You set conjured. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred, to disavow these usurpations. Usurpations. You set the long S twice in that word, once in the middle, once toward the end. The word itself is legal language, precise and deliberate. A usurpation is not merely a wrong, but a wrong that involves seizing something that belongs to another by force or by the abuse of power. The Congress chose this word to describe what Parliament had been doing in the colonies for a decade. You set the period. You slide the line. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. Consanguinity, blood relation, the common blood of England and America, the shared ancestry that should have created obligation and did not. You set it. One more sentence in the transitional paragraph, then the declaration itself. You are aware at this moment that the smell of the ink has changed slightly, or not changed, intensified. Samuel has been inking the press in the next room, rolling the ink balls across the type faces of the galleys that Dunlap has already locked into the chase, and the smell of fresh ink on metal is carrying through the curtain. It is a warmer smell than the ambient smell of the room, the ink heated slightly by the friction of the rolling, releasing its top notes more fully. Linseed, lamp black. The sharp back note of something almost alkaline. The press is ready. The moment you finish setting this last galley, the moment Dunlap checks it and locks it and carries it to the bed of the press, Samuel will begin to print. You will hear the first pull of the bar from the compositing room. You will hear the platen descend. You will hear the creak of the screw, which is not a loud sound, but carries through the floorboards when the press is under full pressure. That moment is perhaps 30 minutes away. You set the period at the end of the transitional paragraph. You slide the line. You look at the copyboard. The closing paragraph of the Declaration of Independence is 114 words. You have read it twice already, before tonight's work began. You know its shape, the formal legal assertion in the first clause, the renunciation of allegiance to the crown, and then the final sentence, the mutual pledge, the names that will eventually be written beneath it. You pick up the capital W. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states. You set each word as it comes. You set representatives. You set assembled. You set rectitude, a word that means moral straightness, correctness of action. and which appears in this document almost nowhere else in the political writing of the era with such directness. Jefferson is asking the world to judge the colonists' intentions by the standard of rectitude. He is not asking for sympathy. He is asking to be judged. You set solemnly, longs. You set publish. You set declare. You set free. Capital F, because it is the thing that is being claimed, not as a description but as an assertion, the way a title is given, the way a name is given. Free as a state of being. Free as the thing these states now are and of right ought to be. You set independent, capital I. You set states, capital S. The line is full. You slide it onto the galley. You set the next line. The sentence continues. The renunciation of allegiance, the claim of full powers of independent nations, the list of those powers, to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, each one capitalized. Each one a function of sovereignty, the specific things that sovereign nations do and that colonies, by definition, cannot. You set war. You set peace, you set alliances, you set commerce. Your hand is completely steady. You have not thought about whether your hand is steady, which is why it is. The thought of steadiness in compositing introduces exactly the tremor you are trying to avoid. Your hand knows what to do. Your hand has been doing this since before you were old enough to read the words it was setting. You trust it the way you trust the geography of the type case, not by thinking about it, but by letting it operate. The last sentence. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You set lives, you set fortunes, you set sacred honor. The period. You do not slide the line immediately. You hold the composing stick for a moment, the last line of the document sitting in it, reversed, lead and cold, and you read it backwards across the face of the type. Honor, reversed. The H facing right instead of left, the curve of the O opening the wrong direction, every letter a mirror of the letter it will become when it meets paper. But you read it the way you read everything in the stick, automatically, fluently. The reversal no more an obstacle than the dark is an obstacle to someone who has learned to move through it. The last word of this document, in the stick in your hand, is honor. You slide the line. You set the final period, a single dot of lead so small it sits at the very tip of your fingertip when you carry it from case to stick. You place it precisely. You check it with your fingertip, level, seated correctly, not tipping. You slide it. The galley is full. You lift it from the frame and carry it to the stone, both hands flat underneath, the way you always carry a full galley, moving carefully across the 6 feet of floorboard between the compositing frame and the stone table. The galley is heavy, 3 pounds, perhaps 4, of assembled lead type, the last column of the Declaration of Independence, moving through the air in your hands in the lamplight. You set it on the stone. You step back. Dunlap comes immediately. He does not need to be told. He has been watching your speed, calculating, and he was ready. He bends over the galley with the lamp held close, and he reads. He runs his fingertip across the face of the type. He uses the spacing gauge on 2 lines. He checks the final period. He straightens up. He says nothing. The longer silence. Then he picks up the compositing cord, a length of strong twine, and begins to tie the galley, wrapping the cord around the assembled type to hold it in compression while he transfers it to the chase. This is a practiced motion, the cord wound 3 times around the block of type in a precise over and under pattern that holds everything together without any single strand pulling hard enough to displace a sort. You watch him tie the galley. Your hands are at your sides. For the first time in 4 hours, your composing hand is fully open, the stick set down on the frame ledge behind you, your fingers uncurled and resting. The ache is significant now that you are letting yourself feel it. Every small muscle in the composing hand has been working since 8:30, not the dramatic strain of lifting or carrying, but the subtler, accumulated damage of 10,000 small, precise motions, each one requiring the same grip, the same release, the same pinch of finger against lead. That kind of fatigue sits deep in the hand. Your back is a familiar complaint. Your feet are past complaining. None of this is unusual. This is the body at the end of a long job. What is unusual is this. You are at the end of the longest job that has ever come into this shop, possibly the longest job that will ever come into any print shop in any of these newly declared states. You do not think of it in exactly those terms. You do not yet know what the next decades will bring, what documents will need to be set and in what circumstances. But you understand, in the way that a craftsperson understands the weight of an extraordinary piece of work, that what is sitting on the stone in front of you is not ordinary. Dunlap carries the tied galley to the press room. The curtain swings behind him. You hear the sound of the chase being adjusted, metal on metal, the slight ringing note of the iron frame, and then the wooden tap of the coins being driven home with the coin key, the type locked solid in the formy. Then a pause. Then Dunlap's voice, speaking to Samuel in the press room, too low to make out the words. Samuel's response, also low. Then the sound of the press being made ready for the final formy, the scrape of the tympan frame being repositioned, the ink balls being rolled across the typeface one more time, the sound slightly wet, slightly adhesive, the ink picking up the texture of the metal below it. You stand at the compositing stone and look at the room. The copyboard holds Jefferson's manuscript, its work done. The type cases are disordered from the night's picking, letters depleted in some compartments, untouched in others, the surface of the case uneven in the particular way it gets uneven during a long job, the frequent sorts worn smooth and low in their compartments, the rare ones still crisp at the rim. The hell box is heavier than it was at 8 o'clock, the broken and worn sorts accumulating through the night. The oil lamp has been refilled twice. The tallow candle on the small shelf beside the copyboard is barely a stub now, the wax pooled in the tin dish beneath it, the flame very low. The room smells of a night's work. You pick up the manuscript from the copyboard. This is the only handwritten copy of the Declaration of Independence that will leave the State House tonight. It belongs to the Congress. When the print run is finished, it will be returned. You are holding it only to move it off the copyboard, to set it somewhere safe while the press room runs, so that it is not in danger from a splash of ink or a spark from the lamp. You carry it to the small desk in the corner of the compositing room. the desk where Dunlap keeps his accounts and writes his correspondence, and you set it there, flat, weighted at one corner by a small iron sort box so it will not shift. You look at it for a moment. Jefferson's handwriting is not what you expected. You had an idea of what a Virginia gentleman's handwriting would look like. Formal, practiced, the loops precise. This is not that. This is the handwriting of someone who writes quickly, who thinks faster than the pen can move, with the revisions and second thoughts layered into the text in real time rather than on a separate draft. The handwriting is alive in the way that working documents are alive, as opposed to the fair copies that are made afterward, the beautiful dead things. The document on the press right now is already becoming the fair copy of this. The ink drying on the paper as the impressions run, each one identical, each one exactly as clean and formal as the lead type can make it, none of them carrying the evidence of the mind that first wrote these words. You will not see the fair copy, the formal engrossed document, the one that will be signed, the one that will survive in archives, will be written out by a professional engrosser weeks from now, in a round, clear hand, each letter perfectly formed. You will not see that either. What you have held tonight is the original, the working document, the thing with crossings out and interlineations, the evidence of thought. You step away from the desk. From the press room, through the curtain, comes the sound of the first pull of the bar. The screw turns, the platen descends. The press groans slightly under the pressure, not a sound of distress, but of function, of force being applied correctly to a machine built to receive it. Then the rising sound as the bar is released and the platen lifts. The first impression of the Declaration of Independence has been made. You stand in the compositing room and listen to the second pull, then the third. The press finds its rhythm, pull, release, Samuel working at a steady pace, and you can hear Dunlap's heavier step moving around the press, checking the impressions as they come off, holding each one to the lamp, looking for pick, for smear, for any error in the inking. You go to the curtain. You do not go through it. You stand at the edge, your hand on the heavy fabric, and you listen to the press. The press Dunlap is running tonight is a common press, the standard wooden screw press that has served as the primary printing technology of the Western world since the 1450s. The design has changed very little in 300 years. The frame is built from heavy oak timbers, mortised and pegged, the joints reinforced with iron bolts. The screw itself is hand-cut from a single piece of hardwood, maple usually, in American shops. The thread carved with a pitch steep enough that a single full rotation of the bar moves the platen approximately 1.25 inches. In practice, the press is not screwed and unscrewed one full rotation per impression. The pressman pulls the bar through roughly 1/3 of a rotation, enough to drive the platen down onto the tympan and the paper and the type with the full pressure needed for a clean impression, and then reverses, releasing the bar, which swings back by gravity and the spring of the wooden frame. At full speed, this cycle takes approximately 4 seconds. At Samuel's pace tonight, careful, deliberate, checking each sheet, it is taking perhaps 8 seconds per copy, 200 copies, 26 minutes of press time, assuming nothing goes wrong. You listen to the rhythm of it through the curtain. Pull, the groan of the screw under pressure, the slight pop of the platen seating against the tympan. Release. The bar swinging back. The rising sound of the frame returning to rest. Pull. Release. It is a sound you have heard in every shop you have worked in every city you have imagined. It is the sound of this trade, the heartbeat of every print shop on this continent, the rhythm that underlies every newspaper, every pamphlet, every proclamation, every page of every book that has circulated through Philadelphia in the last 50 years. Tonight it is printing the Declaration of Independence. You let the curtain fall. Each copy is one more physical object in the world that says these colonies are free, that says this is no longer a question under debate, that says the people of this continent have decided, and they have decided in writing, and the writing has been set in metal and pressed into paper, and now exists independently of any one person's will. You go back to the compositing stone. You pick up the compositing cord from where Dunlap left it after tying the last galley. You coil it neatly and set it in its place on the shelf. You pick up the spacing gauge from the stone and return it to the small wooden rack where it lives. You pick up the bodkin from your apron pocket and set it on the frame ledge. You begin to redistribute the type from the hell box back into the case, one damaged sort at a time, setting each one in its correct compartment. This is not tonight's work. The broken sorts cannot be used again and will need to go to the foundry eventually. But the motion is familiar, and the room needs to be put back in order, and you need something to do with your hands while the press runs. You think while you sort about where these copies are going. You know from things Dunlap said earlier in the evening, not explaining, just thinking aloud in the way that printers sometimes think aloud while they work, that the broadsides will need to reach every one of the 13 colonies, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Massachusetts, New York, the Carolinas, Georgia, some of them by rider, the folded broadside in a saddlebag, traveling the post roads at whatever speed the roads and the horses allow, some by boat down the Delaware and into the bay and along the coast, some by hand, passed from one print shop to another in a relay that stretches up the full length of the continent. General Washington is in New York. He will receive a copy. His army will hear it read aloud on the parade ground. The words carrying across a field of men who have been fighting this war for over a year without knowing, in any official sense, what the final aim is. Not what they are fighting away from, they know that, but what they are fighting toward. The thing on the other side of the war, if they win it. That thing now has a name and a document, and in a few hours it will have 200 printed copies moving outward from this city in every direction. The press pulls, and pulls, and pulls. You sort lead in the lamplight. The night is deep around the shop on Chestnut Street, the city sleeping in its summer heat. The streets empty, the harbor invisible in the dark 3 blocks east. Somewhere in that harbor the Delaware River is moving, carrying whatever it carries, timber, silt, the memory of 100 years of commerce, toward the bay and out to sea. You set a worn A in its compartment. You set a cracked N. You set a perfect M that simply didn't survive the hellbox triage. The press pulls. One more copy. One more copy. One more copy. The press stops. Not gradually, not winding down. It stops the way a press stops when the run is finished. The final pull, the final release, and then the particular silence that follows, which is not the same as the silence before the press started. Before, the silence was potential. This silence is completion. You stop sorting. You hear Dunlap's voice in the press room, low, saying something to Samuel. Samuel's response. The sound of the tympan frame being lifted and set aside. The sound of the chase being slid off the press bed. You stand at the compositing stone and wait. A few minutes pass. The lamp above the frame has settled to a very low, warm burn. You would need to add oil soon if you were planning to do more work, but you are not planning to do more work. The wick is trimmed down to almost nothing, the flame barely a thumbnail of light. In its reduced glow, the compositing room looks smaller than it does in full working light. The type cases are dim shapes on their frames. The copyboard an empty stand now that the manuscript has been moved to the corner desk. The hell box a dark tray at the edge of your vision. Dunlap comes through the curtain. He is carrying a single sheet. He holds it out to you without speaking. You take it. It is still slightly warm, not hot. The press impression does not generate enough heat to make the paper hot, but warm in the way that a thing is warm when it has been recently worked, recently touched by machinery, recently made. The paper is damp at one corner where the tympan pressed slightly unevenly, but not badly so. A minor variation that will not affect readability. You hold it up to the lamp. The type is clean. The lines are even. The spacing between the words is consistent from column to column, the justified lines sitting with the precise regularity of good composition. No rivers of white space running vertically through the text. No loose lines gaping between words. The ink impression is deep enough to show clearly, but not so heavy that it has spread at the edges of the letters, what printers call squash, the ink bleeding past the face of the sort and softening the crisp edges of the type. The impression is sharp. It is good work. You already knew it was good work. You knew it before the press ran, because you knew the quality of what you had set. But seeing it on paper, seeing it printed, the reversed lead reversed again by the pressure of the platen into the correct orientation, the backwards text now forwards, the mirror returned to itself, is always different from knowing it. You read it. Not a compositor's backwards reading, not the automatic parsing of reverse type that you do all night without thinking. You read it the way a reader reads it, left to right, top to bottom, the text entering your mind in its intended direction for the first time. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. The long S is gone in the printed version. Or rather, it is there, but to a reader who has not set type, it looks like an S, and the distinction between the long and short form is invisible. The document on the page looks like language. It looks like what it says rather than what it is made of. You read through the preamble. You read the statement of truths. You read the list of charges. Each he has landing with its intended weight. The accumulation working the way Jefferson designed it to work, the charges building into something that feels by the end of the list like an irrefutable case. And then you read the closing paragraph. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states. You have set these words, you have held every letter of them in your hand. You know where Jefferson's pen hesitated, where the ink went thin, where the crossings out required him to write a word twice before he committed to it. You know this document from the inside out, the way you know the geography of the type case in the dark, not by looking at it, but by touching it, by making it, by standing in the place where it was made. You fold the broadside along the center line. You fold it once more, so it is a quarter of its full size, small enough to fit in the pocket of your apron. You put it there. Dunlap watches you do this. He does not say anything. This is the other thing that goes without being spoken in this shop, that the workers who run a print job keep one copy. It is not policy. It is not procedure. It is simply understood the way many things in the printing trade are understood without being stated. The press runs 200 copies, 199 go where they are sent. One stays. Dunlap goes back through the curtain. You hear him and Samuel beginning the work of breaking down the forma, unlocking the coins, releasing the type from the chase, the small tapping sounds of the wooden mallet on the coin key, and then the sound of the chase being set aside, and the type beginning to be removed from the forma and returned to the galley for eventual distribution back to the cases. This is the last phase of any print job. The type that made the document must be unmade. The letters that held together as we hold these truths must be separated back into their individual sorts, each one returned to its correct compartment in the case, W to the upper case, E to its large compartment in the lower, H to its place, and so on, the sentence dissolving back into alphabet, the alphabet dissolving back into raw material for the next job. By morning, every letter of the Declaration of Independence will have been separated and filed, and will be available to become something else. A merchant's advertisement, a notice of court proceedings, a printer's invoice. The words only existed in that configuration for one night, but the paper carries them forward. You stand at the compositing stone and think about this for a moment. Then you begin to clean the compositing frames. This is the last work before you can leave. The frames need to be wiped of ink residue, the stone surface cleared, the tools returned to their places. You take the cleaning cloth from the hook on the wall beside the frame, and you begin to work in the methodical way that the end of a long job requires, moving from one surface to the next, your hands doing the familiar work while the press room sounds continue behind the curtain. Samuel comes through with an armload of galleys, the type from the forme still in the galley trays, ready to be distributed back to the cases. He sets them on the stone without speaking and goes back through the curtain for more. You look at the galleys. The type in them is the Declaration of Independence. The words are scrambled now. The galleys contain the text in the order it was set, column by column, but the columns are no longer in their correct positions relative to each other, and the galleys will be distributed sort by sort without regard to the words they formed. Within an hour, none of this will be recoverable. You could not reconstruct the document from what is in these galley trays. It would be as impossible as reconstructing a conversation from a box of letters of the alphabet. You pick up the first galley. You begin to distribute the type back to the cases, one sort at a time, your hand moving in the long-practiced pattern. Pick from galley, place in compartment, pick, place, that you could do in your sleep. The W from we, you place it in the uppercase. The E from hold, you place it in its large compartment. The space, the compositing spaces go in their own tray, sorted by size. The H from hold, compartment. You are unmaking the document as efficiently as you made it. The same speed, the same precision, the same automatic movement between source and destination. This is the nature of the compositor's work, making and unmaking in equal measure, the words assembled and then dispersed, the job existing fully only during its own process. What remains is the paper. The stack of printed broadsides is on the table in the press room, weighted at one corner with a piece of iron to keep them flat while the ink fully sets. 200 sheets, or rather 199, since one is now in your apron pocket, folded to quarter size, sitting against your hip as you work. You think about Benjamin Franklin. You think about him not because he is famous or because his name has been in the newspapers for 20 years, but because he did exactly this. He stood at a compositing frame. He picked up lead sorts from a type case. He set them in a composing stick, one at a time, backwards, and he slid the lines onto a galley and carried the galleys to the press and ran the press and distributed the type afterward. He did this in his brother James's shop in Boston when he was 12 years old, and he hated the indenture that bound him to his brother's shop so much that he eventually broke it and ran away, walked to Philadelphia with almost nothing, and built a printing operation of his own. The shop Franklin built is 3 streets from where you are standing. Franklin is still in Philadelphia. He is 70 years old, one of the senior members of the Continental Congress, one of the 5 men appointed to the committee that drafted the declaration you have spent this night setting. In 2 years he will go to Paris as the colony's ambassador to France, and he will negotiate the alliances that will determine whether this war can actually be won. But tonight he is here, in this city, presumably asleep, or trying to be. He knows what a compositing frame smells like at 2 in the morning. You wonder if he thought about that when he was helping to draft the document that someone would need to set in type tonight. You wonder if he thought about the person who would do it, who would stand at the case and pick up the letters one at a time, reading the words backwards before the world could read them forwards. You wonder if he thought, I know what that is like. You place the T from truths in its compartment. You place the H. You place the S. You place the small piece of leading that sat between the lines, a thin strip of blank metal, no letter on it, nothing but space, the physical material of the gap between one line and the next. You set it in the leading drawer. It is past 2 in the morning. You know this from the quality of the dark outside the shop window, a particular depth to it, a particular completeness that comes only in the hour between 2 and 3, when the city has exhausted even its late population and the streets have gone to something close to empty. A dog barks somewhere, 2 streets over, and the sound carries with the clarity that sound only has in that deep hour when there is nothing else to absorb it. Samuel has finished in the press room and has gone home. You heard his footstep, heard the front door close behind him. He did not say good night to you. He is 16 and shy, and this was not an ordinary night, and ordinary social forms seemed to require more than any of you had available. Dunlap is still in the press room. You can hear him moving, slower now. The careful movements of a man who has been working for 6 hours and is feeling it in his body but is not finished yet. You work through the second galley. The A from appealing, the P, the 2 Ps, the E. The broadside in your pocket shifts slightly as you move, the folded paper bending at the crease where you pressed it. You can feel its presence there the way you can feel any object that does not ordinarily belong in a pocket. A slight strangeness, a weight and shape that is not usual. It is not heavy. A broadside sheet weighs perhaps 2 ounces, but you are aware of it. You will be aware of it until you are home. You place the last sort from the second galley, a period, the small round dot of lead that ended one of the charges, a period that pressed against the paper of 200 copies tonight and will now go back to its compartment and wait for the next use, and you set it in place. You look at the compositing room. The frames are clean. The stone is clear. The tools are returned. The type cases are full again, or nearly full. The compartments replenished. The copy board is empty, the manuscript gone from it. The candle stub on the side shelf has burned out entirely, a thin thread of smoke rising from the extinguished wick. The room looks, more or less, as it looked when you arrived this evening. Except that it is not. Everything in this room is the same as it was at 8 o'clock. The same type cases, the same stone, the same frames, the same lamp, but the room has had this night inside it, and the night cannot be returned to before. Something happened here. Something was made here. The lead sorts in the cases carry no visible evidence of what words they formed tonight. They are just letters, available for any purpose. But you were here, and you know. Dunlap comes through the curtain. He is carrying his coat, which he took off at some point in the night and left in the press room. He puts it on now, slowly, the motions of a man whose shoulders are tired. He looks at the room. He looks at you. "Good work," he says. 2 words, the longest thing he has said to you all night that was not a technical instruction. You nod. He goes to the corner desk. He picks up Jefferson's manuscript, gently, carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else and that you understand the value of. He folds it and puts it in the inner pocket of his coat, against his chest. He will return it to the Congress in the morning. He goes to the door. He unlocks it. He opens it. The air that comes in from Chestnut Street is still warm. This July heat does not fully release even at 2 in the morning, but it is different from the air in the shop. It smells of stone and horse and the faint coolness that comes off the river at night, even in summer, a reminder that there is water nearby, that the city is built between 2 rivers and the rivers are always there. Dunlap steps out. He does not say anything further. He walks east on Chestnut Street, his footsteps receding in the dark. You stand at the open door for a moment. The street is empty in both directions as far as you can see. The lampposts along Chestnut Street hold their flames, the oil burning low at this hour but still present, small circles of orange light at regular intervals, each one illuminating perhaps 10 feet of cobblestone in each direction before the dark reasserts itself. You step out. You pull the door closed behind you, and you hear the lock catch. You stand on the step. The broadside is in your apron pocket. Your composing hand aches. Your back aches. Your feet, inside their worn leather shoes, have said everything they have to say and gone quiet with exhaustion. You turn west. You begin to walk. Philadelphia at 2:30 in the morning on the 5th of July, 1776, is a city that does not yet know what it is. The people sleeping in the buildings you are walking past, the merchants, the craftspeople, the servants, the boarders in the boarding houses, the delegates who came to this city from other colonies and will ride away from it in a few days, none of them know yet. The document exists. It was adopted yesterday afternoon. It was printed tonight, but the world has not yet been told. In 3 days, the Pennsylvania Evening Post will publish the declaration in full, the first newspaper to do so. In 4 days, on July 8th, the document will be read aloud from a platform in the State House yard to a crowd that will gather in the open air and hear, for the first time, these words spoken in a human voice rather than set in lead. You will be in that crowd. You do not know this yet. You are just walking home. You pass a cat on the steps of a building on 4th Street, gray, watching you with the calm indifference of a creature that has decided the hour is acceptable for sitting outside. You pass a barrel of water outside a cooperage, the wooden staves dark with moisture, the iron hoops bright in the lamplight. You pass a window where a candle is still burning behind the glass, someone awake, reading, or unable to sleep, or working late on something of their own. The city is quiet. The city is sleeping. The city does not know that the thing it has been building toward for the past year and a half has now been set in metal and pressed into paper and is stacked on a table waiting for morning. You walk. Your hand is in your apron pocket, resting against the folded broadside. You can feel the paper through the cloth of the apron, the slight stiffness of it, the crease where you folded it, the texture of the rag paper surface against your fingertips. The ink on it is dry now. It was nearly dry when Dunlap handed it to you, and the walk has taken long enough that it is fully set. Permanent. You turn south on Spruce Street. Your building is the third one on the left. The door is unlocked. The landlady, who occupies the ground floor, has never once locked it in the 3 years you have rented the upper room, on the theory that anyone desperate enough to break into a building in this neighborhood is either looking for money she does not have or shelter from the rain, and in either case deserves more pity than prosecution. You go up the stairs. Your room is small and warm, the heat of the day fully absorbed into the plaster walls and not yet released. The window faces south, which means no morning light to wake you. You will sleep as long as you need to. You have Sundays off. Today is Sunday, technically, though it does not feel like Sunday. You sit on the edge of the bed. You take the broadside from your apron pocket. You unfold it once, then again. The paper opens to its full size, roughly 15 inches wide and 20 inches tall, the full broadside format. The 2 columns of type filling the sheet from the heading at the top to the closing paragraph at the bottom. You set it on the small table beside your bed and smooth it flat with your palm. You look at it in the dark. There is not enough light to read by. The lamp at the end of the street sends a thin thread of orange through the gap in the curtain, touching the edge of the paper, catching the slight sheen of the dried ink on the surface. It is enough to see that the type is even. that the columns are straight, that it is good work. You lie down without undressing. You are asleep before you have time to think anything further. You wake to heat. The room holds the full weight of a July morning by the time you open your eyes. The sun has been up for hours and the south-facing plaster walls have absorbed every degree of it. Your dress is wrinkled from sleeping in it. Your shoes are still on your feet. The broadside is on the table beside you. You lie still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, and then you sit up and pick it up and read it in the morning light. Proper light this time. Full daylight coming through the gap in the curtain. The type sharp and clear. Every line sitting in its correct position. You read it from the heading to the closing paragraph without stopping. It reads the same as it did in the press room. It reads the same as it did backwards, in lead, at 9 o'clock in the evening of the 4th, when you were setting the preamble, and the press had not yet run, and the document was not yet a thing in the world. You fold it, you put it in the drawer of the small table. Then you wash your hands in the basin on the windowsill. Cold water, a sliver of soap, working the ink from the creases of your knuckles the way you do every morning. The ink that is never entirely gone, no matter how thoroughly you wash. The gray undertone of it, permanently worked into the whorls of your fingerprints. You dry your hands on the cloth that hangs from the nail beside the basin. You go to work. The shop is already open when you arrive. Dunlap is at his frame, setting copy for the Pennsylvania Packet. Ordinary work, the newspaper that needs to go out on its regular schedule regardless of what happened the night before. The composed broadsides are gone from the pressroom table. They were collected before you woke by riders and messengers, distributed to the men and horses waiting to carry them out of the city. You do not know exactly when the riders left. You were sleeping. You take your place at your compositing frame. You find the next job in the queue. A legal notice for a printer's client on Market Street, 6 paragraphs, standard measure. You pin the copy to the board. You pick up your composing stick. You find the first letter. The work is the same as it always is. This is the thing about the printing trade that took you several years to understand fully, and that you understand now in your bones. The work does not change based on what it is making. Your hands perform the same motion setting a legal notice as they performed last night, setting the Declaration of Independence. The E in whereas comes from the same compartment as the E in self-evident. The period that ends a merchant's invoice is the same sort that ended sacred honor. The letters do not know what they are saying. Only you know. You set the first line of the legal notice. You slide it onto the galley. You set the second. The days that follow are ordinary days. The shop runs its regular work. The newspaper, the commercial broadsides, the occasional government job. Samuel comes in at 7 in the morning and leaves at 6 in the evening. Dunlap works his long hours without comment. You work yours. On the 8th of July, 4 days after the night in the shop, the Declaration is read aloud publicly for the first time. You know it is happening because the whole city knows. It has been announced. Word has spread through the market and the boarding houses and the streets, and by the time you walk to the State House yard on your midday break, there is already a crowd gathered that extends from the yard wall back into the street. Several hundred people, perhaps more. Workmen, merchants, women with children. A cluster of soldiers in continental uniform standing at the edge of the crowd, men who look like they have been on the road and arrived within the last hour, their horses still dusty from whatever road they came from. The platform is a temporary wooden structure erected at the edge of the yard, elevated enough that the reader can be seen from the back of the crowd. A man climbs to it. You do not recognize him from where you are standing. You are near the back of the crowd, pressed between a woman with a market basket and a large man in a leather apron who smells of tallow and smoke. The man on the platform holds up a paper. He begins to read. When in the course of human events, the crowd is quiet. This is not the quiet of inattention. It is the quiet of several hundred people holding their breath at the same time, the collective suspension of ordinary noise in the presence of something that requires silence. You have heard these words before. You have heard them in the only way it is possible to hear words before they exist in the world. You heard them backwards, in lead, in the small hours of the morning 4 days ago, your composing hand aching, and the lamp burning low, and the manuscript on the copyboard, and the press not yet running. Now they are in the air. The voice of the man on the platform carries across the yard, slightly uneven in the July heat, the words traveling from his mouth through the warm air to the ears of the people standing around you, and the words are the same words you set in type, and they have the same rhythm they had in the composing stick, the same forward pressure through the subordinate clauses, the same landing on the words that carry weight. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Someone near you makes a sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind a person makes when something lands harder than they expected. You do not turn to look. You keep your eyes on the platform. That all men are created equal. You set that line. You set it in the second hour of the work, when the preamble was coming together and your hands were still fresh and the lamp was still bright, and you did not yet know entirely what you were making. You set the capital T of that, and the A of all, and the L and the L and the space and the M of men, and each letter was a specific lead sort, weighing a specific fraction of an ounce, picked from a specific compartment in a specific case, and now those letters have dissolved back into alphabet, and the words they formed are in the air over this yard, in the voice of a man on a wooden platform, going into the ears of everyone standing here. The crowd does not cheer during the reading. They listen. This is not what you expected, if you expected anything. You thought there might be noise, the kind of noise that happens when a crowd is told something it wanted to hear. But the crowd is quiet through the entire reading, listening the way people listen to something they understand. On some level, they will not hear for the first time again. You can only hear something for the first time once. The crowd seems to understand this, collectively, without being told. It is not until the reader reaches the closing, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, that the noise starts. It starts at the front and moves backward through the crowd like a wave moving through water. And by the time it reaches you, it has become a full sound. A sound made of many individual voices doing different things, some cheering, some calling out single words, some simply making the noise of people who have been holding something in for a long time and are releasing it all at once. The man next to you, the one in the leather apron, takes his hat off and holds it above his head and does not say anything, just stands there with his hat raised and his face turned up toward the July sky. You stand still. You do not cheer. You do not raise your hat because you are not wearing one. You stand in the crowd in your work dress and your apron, and you listen to the noise moving around you. And you think about the difference between a thought in Jefferson's head and 200 copies moving outward from a print shop on Chestnut Street. The thing that connects those two things is your hands. You flex your left hand once, the composing hand, still slightly stiff from the night's work even 4 days later, the muscle between thumb and forefinger still carrying a residual soreness that will be fully gone by the end of the week. You feel the stiffness in the joint. You close your hand. Then you turn and walk back to the shop. There is a legal notice that needs to be finished before the end of the day. The weeks that follow are the weeks of a city that has committed to something and is waiting to understand the full cost of what it has committed to. The war news from New York is not encouraging. The British fleet, the largest British fleet ever assembled, arrives in New York Harbor in early July. By late August, the Battle of Long Island will go badly for the Continental Army. By September, British forces will occupy New York City. Philadelphia watches. You watch in the way that people who live in a city watch news from another city, with attention and with the particular quality of attention that comes from knowing the news may eventually describe your own situation. The British took Boston briefly. The British took New York. Philadelphia is the largest city in the colonies, the political center, the place where the Continental Congress sits. The Congress and the shops that serve it, and the printers who make its documents physical, all of these are things a British military command would want to control. You know this. You set type for it every day. The proclamations and proceedings and military orders that come through the shop, each one telling a slightly different chapter of the same story, the story of 13 colonies trying to become something that has no precedent and that the most powerful military force in the world is trying to prevent. You set it all. You set the Pennsylvania Packet's reports on the retreat from New York in September. You set the military orders for the regiments being assembled in Pennsylvania. You set Thomas Paine's The American Crisis in December of 1776, the pamphlet that begins, "These are the times that try men's souls," which Paine wrote while retreating with Washington's army through New Jersey, and which Dunlap receives the manuscript of on a cold December morning and sets into print within 48 hours. You set portions of that one yourself, working from Paine's handwriting, which is smaller and more regular than Jefferson's, less evidence of revision, the words coming out of the pen already in their final form. Each job is the same. Each job is completely different. The British do not take Philadelphia in 1776. They do not take it in the first months of 1777, but in September of 1777, 14 months after the night in the shop, 14 months after the Declaration was printed and the riders left before dawn, the British Army under General Howe defeats the Continental Army at the Battle of Brandywine Creek, 30 miles south of the city, and the path to Philadelphia is open. The Congress flees. The delegates scatter to York and Lancaster, taking what records they can carry. Dunlap receives word on the 15th of September and begins immediately, not printing this time, but the opposite. He breaks down the press. He wraps the type cases in canvas. He loads the press components onto a wagon. You help him. This is also the work. The press that made the declaration must not fall into British hands, not because of what it has already printed, but because of what it might still print, could still print, will print when the British are gone and the shop can be reassembled. A press is not a monument. It is a tool. Tools are moved when the situation requires it. You lift the type cases from their frames, two at a time, and carry them to the wagon. The cases are heavy. The type is all lead. You carry them the same way you carry a full galley, flat, both hands underneath. The weight distributed evenly, moving carefully, not rushing, because a dropped case is a disaster, and a disaster is a luxury you cannot afford in a hurry. You load the wagon. Dunlap drives it out of the city that evening, heading west and north toward Lancaster. The shop on Chestnut Street is empty. The British enter Philadelphia the following day. They occupy the city for 9 months. They use buildings throughout the city for quartering, exactly the charge in the document you set 14 months ago. The charge Jefferson wrote and you handled, and the press printed, and the riders carried out of the city before dawn. He has kept among us in times of peace, standing armies. Here, in the occupation, there is no pretense of peace. There are simply soldiers in your city, in the buildings you pass every day, eating the food that was meant for someone else. You stay in Philadelphia through the occupation. You have nowhere to go, and the practical reality of the occupation, difficult, constrained, occasionally frightening, is survivable in the way that many things that seem unsurvivable from a distance turn out, close up, to be endurable. You find work where you can. A small jobbing press that did not flee, run by a man who has decided that neutrality is more profitable than conviction. You set commercial work for him, notices, invoices, the ordinary machinery of a city that continues to need printed material even under occupation. You do not set anything political. There is nothing political to set, because the political life of the city has been emptied out, taken north with the Congress to York. The broadside is in the drawer of the table beside your bed. You check on it sometimes, not often. Not the way you check on something you are afraid of losing. There is nothing to be afraid of. It is a piece of paper in a drawer, one of 200 printed copies, and the British are not searching rooms for old broadsides. But you check on it the way you sometimes check on things that are important to you, the way a person touches the frame of a door they pass through every day, not thinking about it, just maintaining contact. It is still there. In June of 1778, the British leave Philadelphia. General Clinton, commanding the British forces, receives orders to consolidate in New York, and the occupation ends as suddenly as it began. The soldiers marching out one morning, and the city returning to itself, cautiously at first, and then with gathering momentum, the Congress returning, the shops reopening, the normal machinery of political and commercial life resuming. Dunlap returns. He reassembles the shop. You return to your frame. The type cases are reinstalled, the compositing stone reset, the press reassembled from the components that have been in Lancaster for 9 months. The press works. The type is intact. Nothing was lost. You pick up your composing stick. You find the first letter of the first job. The work is the same. It will always be the same. You set type for the next 30 years in that shop and in the shops of other printers, moving as the trade moves, as the country, The new country, the one that was declared in this city and fought for and eventually won, grows and shifts and opens westward, the post roads extending, the newspapers multiplying, the demand for printed material increasing with every decade as the population grows and the literacy rate climbs and more people need more words on more paper. You do not become famous. No compositor does. There is a category of person in every era who does essential and skilled work at the precise moment when essential and skilled work is most required, and whose name is not recorded, and who is not remembered by history in the way that the authors of documents are remembered. The authors make the words, the compositors make the words physical, and then the compositors unmake them, distributing the type back to the cases, the letters returning to alphabet, ready for the next job. But the paper holds. Of the roughly 200 copies that came off the press on Chestnut Street in the early morning of July 5th, 1776, 26, will survive the centuries. They will travel, some to archives, some to private collections, some through a succession of owners whose names will eventually be as forgotten as yours. They will be studied, analyzed, compared. The spacing will be examined by scholars who have spent their careers learning to read the physical evidence of how type was set, who composed which galley, where one compositor's work ends and another's begins. They will see your work. They will not know it is yours, but they will see it in the evenness of the lines, in the consistent spacing, in the clean impression with no squash at the letter edges and no loose lines gaping between the words. The document you set was set well. That is the record. The streets outside this room are quiet now. The lamp on the table is burning low, the oil nearly gone, the flame drawing down to a small blue point at the base of the wick. In a few minutes it will go out on its own, and the room will be dark. The kind of dark that a summer night in this city makes. Not full darkness, never full darkness. The lamp posts on Chestnut Street, always providing some thread of orange through the window. Enough to see shapes, enough to know where you are. You are here. You have been here all along. You close your eyes. The composing stick is on the frame ledge behind you, set at 22 picas, ready for tomorrow's work. The type cases are full or nearly full, the compartments replenished, the letters waiting in their places, E in its large compartment, T beside it, A, O, I, N, all of them ready to become words, to become sentences, to become the documents that a country needs to understand itself. The press is in the next room. It is quiet now. Everything is quiet. The heat of the day is releasing, slowly, through the walls of the room, the stone and plaster giving back what they absorbed through the long July afternoon. The air is a little easier. The lamp has gone to almost nothing, just warmth now, barely light, the smell of the cooling oil and the faint char of the wick. You are lying down. You are not thinking about anything in particular. You are thinking, if you are thinking at all, about the weight of a full galley in your hands, about the feel of a capital W picked from the upper case, about the long S and its compartment slightly to the left of the short one, the small distinction that your hand knows without your mind having to direct it, about the first pull of the bar and the groan of the press and the paper coming off clean. About 200 copies. About 26 that will last. about the drawer beside your bed, and what is in it, and the fact that it is yours. The lamp goes out. The room is dark and warm and still. You are already somewhere between waking and sleep, in the place where the day's work dissolves back into the body the way type dissolves back into alphabet, the specific shapes releasing, the compartments receiving them, everything returning to the state of readiness from which the next thing will be made. Rest now. You have done the work. You set every word. If you are still awake, you can let that go now. Let the composing stick rest. Let the galley sit. Let the press be quiet for the rest of this night, and the next, and as many nights as you need. The document is out in the world. It does not need your hands anymore. Sleep. Thank you for spending this night in the print shop with Margaret Holt and John Dunlap, and with the document that was made there. The Dunlap broadside is one of the most studied printed artifacts in American history, and the compositors who set it have no names in the record. If this kind of story is what you come here for, a subscribe to Quiet History at Bedtime means a great deal. A like or a comment tells me this one found the right people. And if you want to share it with someone who might need a long, quiet night,